The Ghost of Geography, a comparative analysis of maritime choke points. Chapter 1, The Choke, the Physics of the Narrow. Act 1, The Hook. The air in the Persian Gulf during the spring of 2026 is heavy, stagnant, and thick, with an almost suffocating humidity. On the bridge of a colossal Indian liquefied natural gas tanker, the crew looks out over a waterway that has become the most dangerous and paralyzed stretch of ocean on the planet. The sun beats down on the steel deck, radiating a blistering heat that forces the sailors to seek shelter below, where they wait in a state of suspended, agonizing animation. The navigation screens flicker with erratic signals, the victim of relentless electronic interference and location spoofing that has rendered modern satellite guidance virtually useless. Above them, the sky occasionally tears open with the roar of fighter jets, while in the distance, plumes of thick black smoke rise from coastal industrial terminals. This is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow marine corridor barely 21 miles wide at its tightest point, and it is entirely closed for business. To understand the sheer gravity of this modern maritime crisis, one must adopt the clinical, unsentimental perspective of geographic determinism. We must look at human societies not as political entities acting out of pure free will, but as biological populations utterly dependent on the physical environment for their survival and expansion. The proximate cause of the tension in the Gulf is a tangled web of political rivalries, escalating military strikes involving the United States, Israel, and Iran, and the sudden closure of the shipping lanes by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. According to official statements from the United States Secretary of Defense, joint military operations have recently struck over 15,000 targets, drastically reducing the adversary's missile volume and drone capabilities. Yet despite this overwhelming display of technological and military superiority, the strait remains firmly shut. This paradox reveals that the ultimate cause of the crisis is not political, but planetary. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most important geographic bottleneck in the global industrial ecosystem, an environmental trap from which modern civilization cannot easily escape. As documented in a rapid analysis released by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the impact of this closure is instantaneous and catastrophic. The world relies on this narrow channel for roughly 1/4 of its seaborne oil trade, a staggering volume of fossil fuels that powers the economies of the Northern Hemisphere. When the passage is blocked, the lifeblood of global commerce stops pumping. Almost immediately upon the severing of this artery, global crude prices surge past $90 a barrel, sending shockwaves through equity markets and sharply inflating the cost of marine shipping fuel. Tanker freight rates multiply, and war risk insurance premiums climb to prohibitive heights, forcing international shipping conglomerates to reroute their massive vessels on vast, inefficient detours that disrupt supply chains across the entire globe. Data from shipping analysts indicates that daily traffic through the strait has plummeted by 95%, with container shipping diversions surging by over 300%. Yet, while the international media fixates on the price of petroleum, a far more insidious threat gathers momentum in the holds of the ships anchored off the coast of Dubai and Fujairah. The Strait of Hormuz is not merely a conduit for energy, it is the central artery for global agriculture. According to shipping analytics and financial institutions like the Dutch bank ING, approximately 1/3 of the global seaborne trade in fertilizers passes through this specific body of water. 16 million tons of essential agricultural inputs, including ammonia, nitrogen, and urea, are transporting out of the Arabian Gulf every single year. These chemical compounds are the foundational building blocks of the modern green revolution, the synthetic nutrients that allow the Earth to feed 8 billion human beings. Without them, the soil depletes rapidly and crop yields collapse. The disruption of this fertilizer supply chain threatens a global food price shock of unprecedented and terrifying proportions. A significant percentage of global urea exports, the most widely used nitrogen fertilizer, originates from Gulf producers and is heavily directed toward key agricultural markets in emerging economies. An analysis published by the shipping services company Signal Group highlights that India, Brazil, and vast swathes of the global south depend absolutely on the steady flow of these materials to maintain their domestic food production. Furthermore, unlike strategic petroleum reserves maintained by major industrialized nations, there are no equivalent strategic fertilizer reserves. When the ships stop moving, the fertilizer does not reach the fields, the harvest fails, and inflationary pressures exacerbate existing fragilities in import-dependent regions. The geographic concentration of these vital resources highlights a terrifying vulnerability. The world is constantly one step away from mass starvation, all because of a 21-mile gap in the crust of the Earth. For the thousands of seafarers trapped on these floating leviathans, the crisis is intensely physical and overwhelmingly shaped by the immediate environment. The weather conditions in the strait drastically exacerbate the tension of the blockade. As detailed by regional meteorological monitors and the oceanographic researchers at Weather News, the Persian Gulf experiences the highest average summer sea surface temperatures of any ocean on the globe. The heat is oppressive, trapping moisture near the surface and enveloping the anchored vessels in a stifling blanket of humidity. During the spring months, the region is battered by the shamal, a fierce northwesterly wind that can whip the sea into a frenzy for days at a time, bringing blinding dust storms and sudden, violent squalls that compromise the safety of the stationary fleets. The men and women stranded on these ships are hostages to both geopolitics and geology. They sit on millions of barrels of highly flammable crude oil and explosive chemical fertilizers, waiting for diplomatic breakthroughs while surrounded by military vessels and the constant threat of asymmetric naval attacks. One seafarer, speaking from a cabin below deck to international journalists at The Guardian, described the terrifying reality of loading crude oil while explosions lit up the night sky, completely stripped of communication and navigation tools due to regional electronic warfare. The sheer desperation of the situation is a testament to the inescapable power of the choke point. These colossal vessels, marvels of modern engineering, are reduced to helpless steel islands, trapped by the narrowness of the water and the hostility of the shores. The Iranian government, acting as the modern gatekeeper of this vital corridor, understands the immense leverage bestowed upon them by the landscape. By asserting de facto control over the islands scattered throughout the strait, such as Abu Musa and the Greater and Lesser Thames, they have fortified a geographic bottleneck that requires minimal conventional military force to hold. Official advisories from the United States Maritime Administration warn merchant ships to stay clear of naval units, to expect aggressive interrogations over marine radios, and to treat the entire area as a high-risk combat zone fraught with navigational hazards like spoofing and jamming. Some ships, attempting to navigate the blockade under diplomatic cover, are forced into the shallow, dangerous waters near the Iranian coastline, risking sea mines and catastrophic grounding just to keep the fragile thread of international trade intact. This is the absolute tyranny of the proximate cause. The politicians, the generals, and the commodity traders are all reacting to the immediate pressures of war and commerce. They argue over treaties, deploy aircraft carriers, and calculate the rising cost of grain in distant capitals, believing they are in control of their destinies. But they are merely playing a game whose rules were written millions of years ago by forces far beyond human comprehension or control. The global economy is choking because the Earth itself is pinched. To understand why humanity has backed itself into this precarious corner, we must strip away the modern veneer of steel, synthetic chemicals, and politics. We must look deeply into the planetary architecture that created the Strait of Hormuz, transitioning from the anxious bridge of a trapped oil tanker and descending to the dark, shifting tectonic plates beneath the ocean floor.